The auctioneer's gavel hung motionless in the sweltering August air, his weathered hand frozen mid-strike as every eye in Willowbrook's dusty Main Street turned toward the lone horseman. Samuel Blackwood sat astride his black stallion like judgment itself, blue eyes cutting through the crowd of leering miners and desperate traders who'd gathered to bid on human flesh. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Decent folks didn't interrupt such transactions. A woman's sob cracked the silence as 19-year-old Clara Whitmore clutched her baby tighter, her torn calico dress barely concealing the trembling that seized her entire frame. The infant, 8-month-old Rose, whimpered against her mother's racing heart, tiny fingers grasping at the last shreds of hope. Old Martha Jenkins stumbled backward from her porch, remembering her own daughter lost to such men years ago, when prayers went unanswered and good people looked away. "I'll take them both," Sam's voice carried like thunder across the stunned crowd. "Name your price." Who was this stranger, and why would he risk everything for two souls the world had already abandoned? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The crowd's murmur died as Samuel Blackwood dismounted with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to commanding respect. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen too much death and chose life anyway. His weathered hands, scarred from years of ranch work and older wounds from Gettysburg, rested calmly at his sides despite the tension crackling through the air like heat lightning. Clara Whitmore had learned to read men's intentions in their eyes, a skill no 19-year-old should possess. But Sam's gaze held something she'd almost forgotten existed: genuine compassion, without expectation of payment. Still, hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not after Jeremiah Cross had taught her that wolves often wore shepherd's clothing. Rose stirred against her mother's chest, her tiny fist curling around a lock of Clara's auburn hair. The baby's innocent blue eyes, so startlingly similar to the stranger's, seemed to study Sam with an otherworldly calm that made Clara's breath catch. How could an 8-month-old infant appear so knowing, so unafraid, when Clara herself trembled like autumn leaves? Judge Harrison, the corrupt auctioneer who'd orchestrated this moral abomination, wiped sweat from his bulbous face with a silk handkerchief that had seen cleaner days. "Well now, Mr. Blackwood, this here's a legal proceeding. The girl owes debts." "To whom?" Sam's voice cut through the lie like a blade through rotted rope. "Show me the papers." The crowd shifted nervously. Everyone knew Harrison's legal proceedings were as authentic as fool's gold, but in a territory where law enforcement came down to whoever had the biggest gun and the most friends, such details rarely mattered. What mattered was that Sam Blackwood owned 640 acres of prime ranch land, employed half the county's honest men, and had never failed to keep his word. Clara's mind raced with fragments of memory and desperate calculation. 6 months ago, she'd been washing clothes for the boarding house, earning enough to keep herself and Rose fed. Then Cross had arrived with his silver tongue and forged documents, claiming divine right to both her body and her child. When she'd fled his spiritual guidance, she'd left behind everything except the clothes on her back and the baby in her arms. Now, staring at this mysterious cowboy who'd appeared like an answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to voice, Clara felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Not just gratitude, though she felt that in overwhelming waves, but recognition, as if her soul knew something her mind couldn't yet accept. Sam stepped closer, his boots echoing against the wooden platform where moments before she'd stood like livestock awaiting slaughter. $300, he said simply, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. Gold, no questions asked. The amount was staggering, more money than most folks in Willowbrook saw in 5 years. But as Harrison's greedy fingers reached for the payment, Clara wondered what price such generosity would exact from her and the child she'd killed to protect. The transaction completed with unseemly haste, Judge Harrison pocketing Sam's gold while avoiding Clara's eyes. The crowd began to disperse, some muttering about the waste of good money on damaged goods, others whispering speculation about Sam Blackwood's true motives. Clara stood frozen on the platform, Rose heavy in her aching arms, watching her unlikely savior secure his horse's reins with methodical precision. "Ma'am," Sam said quietly, extending his hand to help her down from the auction block. His voice carried the gentle cadence of someone accustomed to calming spooked horses and wounded soldiers. "My wagon's just there. We'll get you both somewhere safe." Clara hesitated, her green eyes searching his weathered face for signs of the cruelty she'd learned to expect from men who claimed to offer protection. But Sam's expression remained patient, his outstretched hand steady as granite. When Rose began to fuss, reaching tiny fingers toward the stranger as if she recognized something Clara couldn't yet see, the last of her resistance crumbled. The wagon ride through Willowbrook's dusty streets felt like a strange dream. Clara had expected whispered conversations, demands for gratitude, or worse, the kind of expectations that made her skin crawl. Instead, Sam drove in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing back to ensure Rose was secure in the nest of blankets he'd arranged without being asked. "Why?" Clara finally whispered, the single word carrying the weight of months spent wondering if kindness still existed in the world. Sam's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins. For a long moment Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it over the wagon wheels, he said, "Everyone deserves a chance to start over." The response felt incomplete, weighted with unspoken history, but Clara found herself believing him. And perhaps it was the way he'd negotiated Rose's blankets, or how he'd positioned himself between her and the crowd's leering faces. Perhaps it was simply that she had no choice but to trust him. As they left Willowbrook's ramshackle buildings behind, the landscape opened into rolling hills dotted with hardy Wyoming grass and scattered pine. The afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, and for the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to breathe deeply. Rose had fallen asleep against her chest, tiny face, peaceful in a way that made Clara's throat tight with emotion. "Tell me about her," Sam said, nodding toward the sleeping infant. Clara's arms instinctively tightened around Rose. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when questions would demand answers she wasn't ready to give. She's my responsibility." Sam glanced at her sharply, something flickering in his blue eyes. "That's not what I asked." The gentle rebuke made Clara flush. She'd grown so accustomed to deflection and half-truths that honesty felt foreign on her tongue. "Her name is Rose. She's 8 months old. She likes music and doesn't cry much, even when she should." Clara's voice softened. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me." Even given how she came to be? The question hit Clara like a physical blow. How could he know? Unless... "What did you hear in town?" Sam was quiet for several heartbeats, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. "I heard enough to know that no child should pay for the sins committed against her mother." Tears Clara had been holding back for days finally spilled over. Not from shame, she'd exhausted that emotion months ago, but from the unexpected relief of being seen without judgment. In Sam's matter-of-fact acceptance, she glimpsed something she'd thought lost forever, the possibility of peace. "Where are you taking us?" she asked. "Home," Sam replied simply, as if the answer explained everything. "To the Blackwood Ranch. It's not much, but it's honest land, and there's room for both of you if you want it. The Blackwood Ranch sprawled across a valley that seemed carved by God's own hands, with rolling pastures bracketed by pine-covered hills and a creek that sang its way through the heart of the property. Clara had expected a simple homestead, perhaps a cabin and barn like most frontier holdings. Instead, she found herself staring at a substantial two-story house built from local stone and timber, its wraparound porch adorned with hand-carved railings that spoke of care and permanence. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and meant it. Rose stirred in her arms, blue eyes opening to take in the new surroundings with that uncanny alertness that never failed to surprise Clara. Sam helped them down from the wagon, his movements economical but gentle. "Built it myself over the past 5 years. Took longer than expected." Something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "Had different plans for it then." Before Clara could ask what he meant, a grizzled man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a leather apron. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and sharp eyes that took in Clara and Rose with obvious curiosity. "Jake Patterson," Sam said by way of introduction. "He helps run the place. Jake, this is Miss Clara Whitmore and little Rose." Jake tipped his hat politely, but Clara caught the meaningful look that passed between the two men. Whatever conversation they'd have about her arrival would happen later, out of earshot. Inside the house, Clara's breath caught. The main room was spacious and clean, with sturdy furniture that showed signs of careful craftsmanship. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by built-in bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. Everything spoke of a man who intended to build something lasting, something worth coming home to. "The guest room's upstairs," Sam said, leading them up a staircase with a banister worn smooth by countless hands. "I figured you and Rose would want to stay together." The room he showed them was larger than any space Clara had called her own since childhood. A double bed with a hand-stitched quilt dominated the space, while a smaller bed, clearly built for a child, sat near the window overlooking the pastures. A rocking chair had been positioned to catch the afternoon light, and a chest of drawers stood ready to hold belongings she didn't possess. "The small bed," Clara said, her voice tight with emotion. "You made it for Rose?" Sam's jaw worked silently for a moment. "Made it for... well, I had hopes once. Seemed a shame to let it go unused when it could serve a purpose." The careful neutrality of his words couldn't mask the deeper story, and Clara found herself wondering about the woman who should have occupied this room, the child who should have slept in that carefully crafted bed. Instead of prying, she simply said, "Thank you for everything." Sam nodded curtly and turned to leave, but Rose's sudden cry stopped him in the doorway. Clara tried to soothe the baby, but Rose's distress seemed to escalate until Sam stepped back into the room. Almost immediately the crying ceased, and Rose reached toward him with a persistence that made Clara's chest tight with complicated emotions. "She likes you," Clara observed, watching as Sam tentatively accepted the infant's reaching fingers. "Babies know things adults forget," Sam replied quietly, allowing Rose to grip his calloused thumb with surprising strength. For a moment, something unguarded passed across his features, a longing so profound it made Clara look away. That evening, over a simple dinner of beef stew and fresh bread, Clara began to understand the rhythm of life at the Blackwood Ranch. Jake regaled them with stories of the local wildlife, while Sam listened with the patience of someone accustomed to the older man's tales. Rose, secured in a makeshift high chair Sam had quickly assembled, babbled happily and scattered more food than she consumed. It was Jake who finally broached the subject Clara had been dreading. "Town's been buzzing about Jeremiah Cross coming through next week," he said casually, but his eyes were sharp on Clara's face. "Preacher man claims he's looking for some lost sheep." Clara's spoon clattered against her bowl. Rose, sensing her mother's distress, began to whimper. Sam's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Cross won't be welcome on this land." "Sam," Jake began, but the younger man's expression brooked no argument. "I said he won't be welcome. That's the end of it." The finality in Sam's tone should have reassured Clara, but instead it filled her with dread. She'd brought danger to this peaceful place, to this good man who'd already lost too much. Cross wouldn't simply accept her disappearance. He viewed her as property, and men like him didn't surrender what they believed they owned. "You don't understand," Clara whispered, gathering Rose closer. "He has papers, legal documents. He'll say Rose belongs to him." Sam's blue eyes hardened to flint. "Then he'll learn the difference between what's legal and what's right. And on my land, right wins every time." The following days settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. Clara woke each morning to the sound of Sam's boots on the porch as he headed out to tend the cattle, and she found herself looking forward to that gentle sound more than she dared admit. Rose thrived in the clean mountain air, her cheeks growing rosy with health as she explored her new surroundings from the safety of Clara's arms or the blanket Clara spread under the old oak tree near the house. Clara threw herself into making the ranch a proper home, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that hardly needed repair, and cooking meals that far exceeded what Sam and Jake required. It was her way of proving her worth, of justifying the space she occupied in this haven Sam had created. When Sam complimented her biscuits or Jake praised her way with the vegetable garden, Clara felt a warmth she'd almost forgotten existed. But it was the evenings that undid her careful emotional defenses. After supper, Sam would settle into his chair by the fireplace while Clara rocked Rose to sleep. Sometimes he read aloud from books Clara had never imagined owning, poetry by Longfellow, adventures by Cooper, even philosophical treatises that challenged her mind in ways her limited education had never allowed. His voice, deep and measured, painted worlds beyond Wyoming's borders, while Rose dozed and Clara pretended to focus on her mending. "You're wasted on domestic chores," Sam said one evening, glancing up from his ledger to watch Clara working complicated sums in her head as she calculated fabric needed for new curtains. "Have you ever considered teaching?" Clara's needle stilled. "Women like me don't become teachers, Mr. Blackwood." "Why not? You're clearly intelligent. Rose responds to you like you hung the moon. And it's Sam. We've moved past formalities, haven't we?" The gentleness in his voice made her chest ache. "Because teachers need spotless reputations and community respect. I have neither." Sam closed his ledger with deliberate care. "What you have is more valuable than reputation. You have character tested by hardship and refined by sacrifice. Any community would be lucky to have you shape their children's minds." Clara looked down at Rose, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You see more in me than exists, Sam." "I see exactly what's there. The question is why you refuse to see it yourself." The conversation haunted Clara as the week progressed. She began to notice things, how Sam spoke to her as an equal, how he asked her opinion on ranch matters, how he never made her feel like a charity case despite the circumstances of her arrival. When Rose fussed during teething, Sam carved her a ring from applewood and sanded it smooth with infinite patience. When Clara worried about Rose's development, Sam assured her that babies grew at their own pace and suggested she was doing everything right. It was Jake who finally forced Clara to confront the feelings she'd been fighting. She was hanging laundry when the old cowhand approached, his weathered face serious. "Miss Clara, I've been watching you and Sam dance around each other for days now, and I figure it's time someone spoke plain." Clara's hand stilled on Rose's tiny dress. "I don't know what you mean." "Course you do. That man hasn't smiled this much since before Elizabeth died, and you light up like Christmas morning every time he walks in a room." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "Mr. Patterson, it's not appropriate." "What's not appropriate is two people who care about each other pretending they don't. Life's too short and too hard out here for such foolishness. Jake's voice gentled. I knew Sam's wife, and she was a good woman. But she's gone, and you're here, and that baby of yours has got him wrapped around her little finger. It's complicated, Clara whispered. Most worthwhile things are. But Sam Blackwood is the finest man I've known in 40 years of knowing men. If you're worried about your past, don't be. He judges folks by their actions, not their circumstances. That afternoon, Clara found Sam in the barn, repairing tack with methodical precision. Rose gurgled happily from her basket nearby, fascinated by dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the open doors. Sam? Clara began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the questions burning in her chest. He looked up, concern creasing his brow. Something wrong? Why did you really buy us at that auction? Sam's hands stilled on the leather he'd been working. For a long moment, only Rose's happy babbling filled the silence. The truth? Sam set down his tools and faced her fully. Because I knew what it meant to lose everything that mattered, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen to someone else. Your wife, Clara said softly. Elizabeth. We married young, full of dreams about filling this ranch with children and laughter. His voice carried old pain worn smooth by time. She died, birthing our son. He lived 3 days. Clara's heart clenched. Sam, I'm so sorry. For 2 years, I told myself that was enough, that I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it. He looked at Rose, who was reaching for him with determined little fists. Then I saw you on that platform, protecting that baby like a lioness, and I realized I'd been only half alive. What are you saying? Sam stood and crossed to where she stood, stopping close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. I'm saying that you and Rose have brought life back to this house. You've brought life back to me. And I'm hoping you might consider making that permanent. Clara's breath caught. Sam, I know it's soon. I know you've got no reason to trust another man's promises. But I love you, Clara. I love that baby girl like she was my own. And if you'll have me, I'd be honored to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that trust. Tears Clara had been holding back spilled over, not from sorrow this time, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. I love you too, she whispered. Both Rose and I do. But Sam, if Cross comes, then we'll face him together, as a family. Sam cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Marry me, Clara. Let me give you and Rose my name, my protection, everything I have. Before Clara could answer, Rose's delighted squeal drew their attention. The baby had managed to pull herself up on the basket's edge and was clapping her hands as if applauding their declaration. The sight was so perfectly timed, so innocently joyful, that both adults burst into laughter. I think that's a yes, Sam said, gathering both Clara and Rose into his embrace. Clara melted into his strength, feeling safer than she had since her parents died. Yes, she whispered against his chest. Yes to everything. But even as Sam's arms encircled them both, Clara couldn't shake the shadow of dread that had haunted her dreams. Jeremiah Cross was coming, and men like him didn't surrender what they believed they owned. She'd found paradise in Sam's love and this beautiful ranch, but paradise always came with a price. As if sensing her thoughts, Sam tightened his hold. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what family does. Clara nodded against his chest, drawing strength from his certainty. She'd spent so many months running, hiding, surviving day by day. Now, for the first time, she had something worth fighting for. Not just Rose's future, but their future together. If Cross wanted to destroy that, he'd have to go through both of them. The sun was setting over the Wyoming hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to promise better days ahead. In Sam's arms, with Rose babbling happily between them, Clara allowed herself to believe that promise might be true. The rider appeared on the horizon just as the morning sun crested the eastern hills, his dark silhouette stark against the golden sky. Clara spotted him first from the kitchen window where she'd been preparing breakfast, and the sight sent ice through her veins. She knew that rigid posture, that deliberate pace. Jeremiah Cross rode like a man who owned the world and everything in it. "Sam!" she called, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying enough urgency to bring him running from the barn. He appeared beside her at the window, his body tensing as he took in the approaching figure. Behind Cross rode 3 other men, their weapons clearly visible even at this distance. Sam's jaw hardened as he recognized Deputy Marshal Thomas Gray among them. "Take Rose upstairs," Sam said quietly, his hand moving instinctively to the Colt at his hip. "Lock the door and don't come out unless I call for you." Clara's hands shook as she gathered the baby, who was babbling happily in her high chair, oblivious to the danger approaching. "Sam, please. I won't let him take you." The promise in his voice was iron hard, but Clara could see the calculation in his eyes. 4 armed men against 1, even with Jake somewhere on the property, were impossible odds. Cross dismounted with theatrical flourish in front of the house, his black coat pristine despite the dusty ride. At 45 he cut an imposing figure, tall and lean with silver-streaked hair and the kind of commanding presence that had convinced countless congregations of his divine authority. His pale gray eyes swept over the ranch with proprietorial interest before settling on Sam. "Mr. Blackwood," Cross called out, his cultured voice carrying easily across the yard. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Sam stepped onto the porch, his stance deceptively casual, but Clara could see the coiled tension in his shoulders. "Can't say I do, preacher. Everything on this land belongs here." Cross smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Come now, surely we can discuss this as civilized men. I'm simply here to collect my wayward wife and child. Surely you understand a man's right to his family." "Your wife?" Sam's voice carried dangerous quiet. Deputy Gray shifted in his saddle, his hand resting on his gun. "We got the marriage certificate right here, Blackwood. All legal and proper. Miss Whitmore's been Mrs. Cross for near 2 years now." From her position at the upstairs window, Clara watched the scene unfold with growing horror. She'd known Cross would come armed with forged documents. His network of corrupt officials and bought-off clerks stretched across 3 territories. But seeing the lie given official weight by Gray's badge made her stomach churn. "That so?" Sam's tone remained level, but Clara caught the subtle signal he gave, a gesture that would have Jake moving into position behind the barn. "Then you won't mind if I examine these documents. Make sure everything's in order." Cross's smile widened. "Of course. Though I confess, I'm curious why a man of your standing would involve himself in such domestic affairs. Surely your time would be better spent tending your own concerns." "My concerns," Sam said deliberately, "include protecting innocent women and children from predators who hide behind false piety." The words hit their mark. Cross's composure cracked for just an instant, revealing something cold and vicious beneath the polished exterior. "Careful, Mr. Blackwood. Slander is a serious charge, especially when directed at a man of God." "Then it's good I'm talking to a man who's forgotten what God looks like." Cross's 3 companions stirred restlessly, hands moving closer to their weapons. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring until Rose's sudden cry from upstairs shattered the moment. The sound hit Cross like a physical blow, his eyes fixing on the upper windows with predatory intensity. "Ah," he breathed. "There she is. My dear Rose. Daddy's come to take you home, sweetheart." Clara's blood turned to ice. The possessive hunger in Cross's voice when he spoke of Rose was unmistakably wrong, confirming her worst fears about his true intentions. She clutched the baby tighter, backing away from the window. "Papers!" Sam demanded, his voice cutting through Cross's sick reverie. Gray dismounted and approached the porch with obvious reluctance, extending a folded document. Clara held her breath as Sam examined it, knowing the forgery would be expertly done. Cross had connections in courthouses from here to Kansas, men who would swear to whatever truth served his purposes. "This says the marriage took place in Dodge City 2 years ago," Sam observed. "Funny thing is, I was in Dodge City 2 years ago, selling cattle. Never saw hide nor hair of any wedding involving Clara Whitmore." "Perhaps you weren't looking in the right places," Cross suggested smoothly. "Or perhaps," came a new voice from the barn, "you weren't looking at the right dates." Jake emerged from the shadows, his weathered face grim with purpose. In his gnarled hands he carried what appeared to be a telegram. Clara's heart leaped. Sam had sent word to his contacts, calling in favors from his military days. "That their telegram came in this morning from the courthouse in Dodge," Jake announced. "Seems they got no record of any marriage involving Clara Whitmore. Ever. But they do got record of one Jeremiah Cross being run out of town on charges of—" "Enough!" Cross's facade finally cracked completely, revealing the rabid fury beneath. His hand moved to his gun, but stopped when he found himself facing not just Sam's drawn Colt, but Jake's rifle as well. Now," Gray interjected nervously, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation was developing. "No need for violence. Maybe there's been some mistake." "The only mistake," Sam said coldly, "was letting this snake slither onto my land. You've got 10 seconds to ride out, Cross. All of you." Cross's face contorted with rage, but he was outnumbered now and he knew it. "This isn't over, Blackwood. That woman and child belong to me, and I'll have them back." The law," Jake interrupted, waving another telegram, "is mighty interested in talking to you about some missing women from your congregation in Colorado. Seems the territorial marshal's been looking for you for quite some time." Cross went pale, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. With a snarl of pure hatred, he wheeled toward his horse. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. "That baby carries my blood, and I'll see her raised proper if it's the last thing I do." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She sank to her knees, Rose clutching at her dress as the terrible truth washed over her. Cross wasn't just claiming Rose as property. He was claiming her as his biological daughter. And if that was true, if the assault that had resulted in Rose's conception had been more than Clara remembered, the implications made her physically ill. But even as terror threatened to overwhelm her, Sam's voice drifted up from below, steady and sure. "Then you'll die disappointed. That child has a family now, and we protect our own." Cross's departure brought no peace, only the terrible certainty that worse was coming. Clara descended the stairs on unsteady legs, Rose pressed against her chest like a talisman against the darkness gathering around them. Sam met her at the bottom of the staircase, his weathered hands gentle as they cupped her face, but she could see the storm brewing behind his blue eyes. "We need to talk," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words she'd never wanted to say aloud. They settled in Sam's study, the room that had become their sanctuary for evening conversations and shared dreams. Now it felt like a courtroom where Clara would finally face judgment for sins that weren't her own. Rose fussed in her arms, sensing the tension that crackled between the adults like electricity before a storm. "He's right," Clara began, the words tasting like ashes. "About Rose. About her parentage." Sam's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened as his hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Tell me." The story spilled out in broken fragments. How Cross had arrived in her previous town 2 years ago, a charismatic preacher who drew crowds with his passionate sermons about redemption and righteousness. How he'd taken special interest in the young women of his congregation, offering private counseling sessions and spiritual guidance. How Clara, desperate for the stability and community she'd lost with her parents' death, had trusted him completely. "I was 17, Clara whispered, staring down at Rose's innocent face. "He said I needed special prayer, that I carried demons from my parents' deaths. He gave me something to drink, said it was blessed wine. When I woke up—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't give voice to the violation that had shattered her world. Sam's jaw worked silently, his entire body rigid with carefully controlled fury. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Did you tell anyone?" Clara shook her head. "Who would believe me? He was a man of God, respected by everyone. I was just an orphan girl with no family, no standing. He told me it was my fault, that I'd tempted him, that God would punish me if I spoke against his servant." "So you ran?" "Not immediately. I was too ashamed, too confused. It wasn't until I realized I was carrying his child that I understood I had to leave. But he found out somehow. He always knew things about his congregation, like he had spies everywhere. He came to me with papers claiming we were married, said he'd make an honest woman of me if I submitted to his will." Rose began to cry, a thin wail that cut through Clara's confession like a blade. Clara tried to soothe her, but her own tears were falling now, hot and bitter with years of suppressed pain. "I couldn't let him have her," Clara continued, her voice breaking. "I couldn't let him raise her to believe that what he did was righteous. So I took the little money I'd saved and ran. I've been running ever since." Sam rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her with infinite gentleness. His hands covered hers where they trembled against Rose's back. "Look at me," he said softly. Clara raised her eyes to meet his, expecting to see disgust or pity or the kind of careful distance men adopted when faced with damaged goods. Instead, she found only fierce protectiveness and unwavering love. "That man is not Rose's father," Sam said with quiet conviction. "Biology doesn't make a father any more than it makes a mother. Love does. Sacrifice does. Being there every day, through every fever and every milestone and every moment that matters. That's what makes a parent. But if he has legal rights—" "He has no rights," Sam interrupted, his voice steel hard. "And not legal, not moral, not in any way that matters. That baby girl is yours, Clara. You carried her, you birthed her, you've loved and protected her every day of her life. And now she's mine too, if you'll have it that way." Clara's breath caught. "Sam?" "I mean it. I want to adopt her legally, give her my name and my protection. Let Cross try to claim a Blackwood. He'll find out what that means in this territory." Rose's crying had subsided to hiccups, as if she sensed the shift in the conversation. Clara looked down at the baby's face, seeing not Cross's pale eyes, but her own green ones, not his cruel mouth, but her own stubborn chin. Rose was hers in every way that mattered, and Sam was right. Love made families, not blood. "He'll come back," Clara warned. "Men like Cross don't accept defeat. He'll bring more men, more weapons. He'll try to take her by force." Sam's smile was grim and predatory. "Let him try. This is Wyoming territory, and we settle things the Western way here. If Cross wants a war over that baby, he'll get one, but it won't end the way he expects." The promise in Sam's voice should have comforted Clara, but instead it filled her with dread. She'd found happiness, found love, found the family she'd never dared dream of, and now her past was threatening to destroy it all. Cross struck 3 nights later, under cover of darkness and a new moon that left the ranch shrouded in impenetrable black. Clara woke to the sound of breaking glass downstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs as she reached instinctively for Rose. The baby's crib was empty. "Rose!" The scream tore from Clara's throat as she stumbled from bed, her bare feet finding the cold wooden floor. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too still, as if death itself had settled over the Blackwood Ranch like a suffocating blanket. Sam's voice bellowed from somewhere below, followed by the crash of overturning furniture and Jake's colorful cursing. Clara grabbed the rifle Sam had insisted she keep by her bed and crept toward the staircase, her nightgown ghostly pale in the darkness. Each step felt like descending into hell itself. The scene that greeted her in the main room was her worst nightmare made manifest. Sam knelt on the floor, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, while Jake lay motionless beside the overturned table. Cross stood in the center of the destruction like an avenging angel, Rose crying in his arms while Deputy Gray and two other men kept their guns trained on Sam. "Ah, Clara, my dear," Cross said smoothly, though his eyes burned with fanatic fervor. "So good of you to join our little reunion. I was just explaining to your friend that it's time for you and our daughter to come home where you belong." "She's not going anywhere with you," Sam growled, struggling to rise despite the gun barrels pointed at his chest. Cross's laugh was cold as winter wind. "I'm afraid you no longer have a say in the matter. You see, I've had time to prepare proper documentation this time. Territorial law is quite clear about a father's rights to his legitimate children." He pulled a rolled paper from his coat with his free hand, Rose's cries growing more desperate as she reached toward Clara. "A writ of custody signed by Judge Morrison in Cheyenne, perfectly legal, I assure you." Clara's rifle trembled in her grip. She could see the triumphant gleam in Cross's eyes, the sick satisfaction of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Behind him, Gray shifted uncomfortably, his usual bluster replaced by obvious unease. "Judge Morrison's been dead 6 months, Jake's voice croaked from the floor. The old cowhand was alive, blood matting his silver hair but his eyes sharp with fury. "Died of the fever last spring, anybody knows that." Cross's composure cracked for an instant before reasserting itself. "Clearly you're mistaken. This document is perfectly—" The front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire house. Federal Marshal William Hayes stepped through the splintered frame like justice incarnate, his badge gleaming in the lamplight and a peacemaker steady in his weathered hand. Behind him came 3 more federal agents, their weapons drawn and ready. "Jeremiah Cross," Marshal Hayes announced in a voice that carried the authority of the entire United States government, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, assault, and about a dozen other charges the territorial prosecutor's been dying to discuss with you." Cross went pale as milk, his grip on Rose loosening just enough for Clara to see her chance. Without thinking, she launched herself across the room, her rifle forgotten as maternal instinct overrode everything else. Cross tried to retreat, but Clara was already there, her hands closing on her daughter as Rose's cries turned to relieved whimpers. "You can't do this," Cross snarled at the marshal. "I have rights." "That child is mine by blood. Blood doesn't give you the right to terrorize women and children," Marshal Hayes replied coldly, "or to forge legal documents, or to flee warrants in 3 territories. You're done, Cross." The arrest happened with swift efficiency. Gray surrendered without a fight, his face gray with the knowledge that his corruption had finally caught up with him. Cross's other men threw down their weapons the moment they realized federal agents surrounded the house. But Cross himself wouldn't go quietly. As the marshal's men moved to restrain him, his facade of civilization finally cracked completely. "She's mine," he screamed, his voice raw with madness. "The child carries my seed. I have God's own right to reclaim what was stolen from me." "The only thing stolen," Sam said, rising unsteadily to his feet, "was Clara's innocence." and that debt can never be repaid. Cross lunged toward Clara with sudden, desperate fury, but Sam intercepted him with brutal efficiency. The two men crashed to the floor in a tangle of fists and fury. But the fight was over almost before it began. Sam's war-hardened strength and righteous anger proved more than a match for Cross's desperate madness. When Sam finally rose, Cross lay still beneath him, unconscious but breathing. The federal agents moved in to secure the prisoner, while Clara clutched Rose to her chest, both of them trembling with relief and residual terror. "How?" Clara whispered to Marshal Hayes. "How did you know to come?" The marshal smiled grimly. "Your friend Mr. Blackwood sent word through old military channels. We've been tracking Cross for months. Seems he left a trail of broken women and forged documents across half the frontier. You're not his first victim, Mrs. Whitmore, but God willing, you'll be his last." As the agents dragged Cross from the house, he turned back one final time, his eyes burning with unrepentant hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "That child will know the truth about what she is. She'll know her father's blood runs in her veins." "No," Clara said quietly, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "She'll know she's loved. That's the only truth that matters." Cross's answering roar of fury was cut short as the agents hauled him into the night. In the sudden silence that followed, Clara sank into Sam's arms, Rose babbling happily between them as if the nightmare had never happened. They were free, finally, truly free. But even as Sam's embrace surrounded them with safety and love, Clara couldn't shake Cross's final words. Rose would grow up knowing she was wanted and cherished, but someday she might ask questions about her origins that would be painful to answer. When that day came, Clara prayed she would have the wisdom to help her daughter understand that love, not biology, defined family. Spring arrived at the Blackwood Ranch like a benediction. Painting the Wyoming hills in shades of green Clara had forgotten existed during the hard winter months. She stood on the porch in her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that Mrs. Patterson had spent weeks sewing in secret, watching the last of the guests arrive for what the whole territory seemed determined to call the wedding of the decade. Rose toddled between the chairs that Jake and the ranch hands had arranged in neat rows across the front lawn, her chubby fingers clutching flower petals that she scattered with the serious concentration of a child who understood she had an important job. At 14 months, she was walking steadily now, babbling in a mixture of words and Rose language that somehow everyone understood. When she spotted Sam adjusting his string tie near the makeshift altar, she squealed with delight and launched herself toward him on unsteady legs. "Papa!" The word came out clear as a bell, and Clara's heart swelled at the pure joy that transformed Sam's weathered features as he scooped Rose into his arms. "There's my girl," he murmured, settling her against his hip with practiced ease. "You ready to help Mama and Papa get married proper?" Rose clapped her hands enthusiastically, then caught sight of Clara on the porch and reached toward her with the imperious demand of a child accustomed to being the center of attention. "Mama! Pretty!" Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the yard and drawing appreciative smiles from their guests. The whole county seemed to have turned out for the occasion, ranchers and their wives, townspeople from Willowbrook. Even Marshal Hayes had made the journey from Cheyenne to serve as an honored guest. Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief while Jake tried to look stern and paternal despite the moisture gathering in his own weathered gaze. Reverend Matthews, the circuit preacher who'd replaced the corrupt minister's Cross had corrupted in his wake, stepped forward with the easy authority of a man who'd married dozens of couples across the frontier. "Folks, if you'll take your seats, I believe we have a wedding to conduct." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she walked down the aisle between the chairs, her eyes locked on Sam's face. 6 months ago, she'd been a broken woman standing on an auction block with her baby in her arms, convinced that her life held nothing but suffering and shame. Now she walked toward a future bright with promise, toward a man who looked at her like she hung the stars in the Wyoming sky. Sam met her halfway down the aisle, offering his arm with the courtly grace that never failed to make her feel like a queen. Rose, perched on his other arm, gurgled happily and grabbed for Clara's bouquet of wildflowers with the single-minded determination of a child who considered everything within reach to be her personal property. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Matthews began, his voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd, "we are gathered here today not just to witness the union of Samuel and Clara, but to celebrate the triumph of love over adversity, of hope over despair, of family bonds that are chosen rather than simply inherited." The words seemed to carry special weight, and Clara saw several guests nodding in agreement. Their story had become something of a legend in the territory, the mysterious cowboy who'd rescued a woman and child from slavery, the corrupt preacher who'd been brought to justice, the federal marshals who'd exposed a network of fraud and abuse that stretched across 3 states. But beneath the dramatic tale lay simpler truths about love, sacrifice, and the courage to begin again. "Samuel," the Reverend continued, "do you take Clara to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" Sam's voice was steady and sure as he answered, "I do. And I take Rose as my daughter, to love and protect and guide as long as God gives me breath." The addition to the traditional vows brought tears to Clara's eyes and approving murmurs from the crowd. This wasn't just a marriage. It was the official creation of a family, the legal recognition of bonds that had been forged in crisis and strengthened by choice. "Clara," Reverend Matthews turned to her, his weathered face kind, "do you take Samuel to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" "I do," Clara whispered, then found her voice and spoke the words that would bind their lives together. "I do, with all my heart." The ring Sam slipped onto her finger was his mother's, a simple gold band that had waited 20 years for the right woman to wear it. As he spoke his vows, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The auction block that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the life she'd never dared dream possible. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of all the kisses yet to come. Rose, caught between them, giggled and clapped her hands as if she understood that something wonderful had just happened. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables groaning under the weight of food, contributed by neighbors who'd traveled miles to share in their joy. Jake produced a fiddle from somewhere and began playing tunes that had the younger guests dancing on the grass while their elders sat in chairs and watched with indulgent smiles. Clara found herself swept into conversation after conversation, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who 6 months ago had been strangers. Mrs. Miller from town presented her with a hand-embroidered table runner, while the Pattersons gifted them with a rocking horse that Jake had carved for Rose during the long winter months. But it was old Martha Jenkins who pulled Clara aside as the sun began to set, her gnarled hands gentle as they touched Clara's cheek. "Child," Martha said in a voice thick with emotion, "I've lived in this territory for 40 years. Seen good times and bad, watched families rise and fall. But I ain't never seen anything prettier than watching you and Sam look at each other like you hung the moon. That baby of yours is going to grow up knowing what real love looks like." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins." That means everything to me. You deserve this happiness, Clara. Don't you ever forget that. And don't you ever let anybody tell you different. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed with promises to visit soon, Clara found herself alone with Sam on the porch while Rose slept peacefully in her new father's arms. The baby had exhausted herself with excitement and celebration, her little face slack with contentment as she dreamed whatever dreams filled the minds of children who were utterly secure in their parents' love. Mrs. Blackwood, Sam said softly, testing the sound of her new name. I like the sound of that. Clara leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and horses and honest work that would always mean safety to her. So do I, though it's going to take some getting used to. We've got the rest of our lives to practice. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one over the Wyoming landscape. In the distance, cattle lowed softly in the pastures, while a night owl called from the old oak tree. It was peaceful, domestic, everything Clara had dreamed of during the dark months when she'd thought such happiness was beyond her reach. Sam, she said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. His arm tightened slightly around her. What is it? Clara smiled, placing her hand over the slight swell of her belly that her wedding dress had successfully concealed. Rose is going to be a big sister come winter. Sam went very still, then carefully transferred Rose to Clara's arms before kneeling beside her chair. His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness as he searched her eyes. Are you sure? Dr. Peterson confirmed it last week. I wanted to tell you sooner, but with the wedding preparations and everything. Sam's answering kiss silenced her words, and when he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Another baby, he whispered reverently. Our baby. Are you happy about it? Happy? Sam laughed, the sound rich with joy. Clara, you've just made me the luckiest man in Wyoming territory, maybe the whole United States. As they held each other close, Rose sleeping peacefully between them and a new life growing beneath Clara's heart, the future stretched out before them bright with promise. There would be challenges ahead. There always were on the frontier, but they would face them together, as a family bound not by law or blood, but by love freely given and gratefully received. Sometimes the darkest moments in our lives become the doorway to our greatest blessings. Clara Whitmore's story reminds us that even when we feel abandoned by the world, love has a way of finding us through the kindness of strangers who become family. At 19, standing on that auction block with baby Rose in her arms, Clara thought her story was ending, but God had other plans. He sent Sam Blackwood, a lonely cowboy with his own broken heart, to prove that real families aren't always born, they're chosen. Their journey from desperation to joy shows us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find the love we thought had passed us by. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, Clara and Sam's story is a testament to the enduring power of faith, hope, and the courage to trust again. Their ranch became a sanctuary not just for them, but for anyone who believes that every ending can become a new beginning. Sometimes our greatest trials prepare us for our most beautiful chapters. We just have to have the faith to turn the page. Share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced an unexpected blessing that came from your darkest hour? What moment in your life reminded you that hope never truly dies? Leave a comment below and share your story of faith and renewal.